Now, before we begin our discussion with our distinguished group, Nate, Gareth, Chris, and Scott, what I'd like to do is pose our very first of 3 polling questions. What we ask attendees to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer and then click on the submit button so that we can record your response. And from top to bottom, the choices are I wish we were thinking of it, that is, it being digital transformation. We started some planning, we are working through changes, we have transformed, or digital what? And what you're welcome to do, as I said, is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer. We then ask that you click on the submit button so that we can record your response. And just so attendees do have sufficient time to respond to our very first of 4 polling questions, that is, we do ask that you select one of the choices and click on the submit button again to recap those choices from top to bottom. They are, I wish we were thinking of it, we started some planning, we are working through changes, we have transformed, or digital what. What we'll do is give attendees just a few more seconds to respond. We'll then very briefly reveal and summarize how you have responded, and then when we begin our discussion, I'm actually going to invite our distinguished panelists to comment. But first, let's just give attendees maybe 2 more seconds to respond. Then, as I said, we will reveal how you have responded, and then I'm looking forward to a robust discussion. And what we can see from among respondents, clearly a plurality indicating that you're working through changes. That's your level of familiarity and where you are in the process of digital transformation. I would acknowledge the next most prevalent response, slightly more than a quarter, you started some planning, but majority, so let's say about 7 out of 10 respondents either are working through changes or have started some planning. So that's actually very encouraging. With that context in mind now, I'd like to begin with our first discussion question, and I'm going to pose this question first to Gareth, Nate, Chris, and then Scott. And my first question for all of you, starting again with Gareth, Nate, Chris, and then Scott, is how can finance leaders use automation and artificial intelligence to help organizations be more, in general, proactive and responsive with regard to governance, risk, and compliance? Related to that, to what extent do the responses that you saw to our first polling question about digital transformation reflect what you have observed in relation to our first discussion question? Again, starting with Gareth, then Nate, then Chris, and then Scott.
Sorry, thanks very much. And firstly, thanks to CFO.com and NADLA for the invite for today. It's something I've really been looking forward to, actually, for the last week. So the thing about this first question, I guess the observation I make in the world of finance is there are parts of the finance role which are well addressed by technology and automation, and therefore I don't hear much about them when advising across the whole board on technology. And there's areas where actually technology hasn't been very helpful, and so problems that have persisted until recently, particularly we think about the commercial responsibilities for finance. Just taking a step back from that and just thinking about the question and governance, risk, and compliance from a finance perspective, the kinds of things that I think about are financial reporting, commercial performance, asset protection, and fraud. When it comes to financial reporting, that would be an example of an area that I see as being fairly mature. I mean, even without technology and automation, those who work in finance have probably more than any other role had the risk and control mindset drawn into them through their training, right? On top of that, there's maturity in systems, there's maturity in transactional flow, and there's maturity in monitoring. So when one thinks about GRC in this space, one thinks of how we monitor those robust controls, how we monitor transactional flow, and ultimately how we ensure that financial reporting is accurate. And that's all well and good, but just because the numbers that are coming out are accurate, it doesn't mean that you're not leaving money on the table or that you have obligations that you're bound by through your contracts, which could cause you a problem. But I was saying earlier that actually, I don't think anybody thought that wasn't a problem. It's just there wasn't an obvious way of using technology in this space to address those issues. And the reason for that, of course, is that when one thinks of contracts, they're textual, right? That they're not about transactions, they're not black and white, and they're not numbers. It's text in different contracts both supply side and customer side. Those contracts may not reside in one place. You can't easily standardize them, or where you do standardize, people want variations because otherwise we can't be commercially astute. And so in the past, the best we could do is retrospectively review those contracts and see, are they compliant with business-wide policy and so on. I think now what we're seeing with the advent of AI, and in particular using NLP, is the notion that now we can better spot and capture those contracts wherever they may reside within a business, and we can use AI to better interpret and understand contractual change, and do it in a way where, rather than just pointing out to a super user, these are all the contracts that have changed or vary, it's a bit smarter than that now, right? I'm not suggesting for one moment that AI replaces compliance professionals, but what I think it does provide is a better way of spotting where there might be problems with a contract, where there is issues with an obligation within a contract, and so on. Now that not only helps somebody working compliance, but it helps us to be more opportunistic, because it gives us greater scope to loosen the shackles, if you will, in terms of contractual approval, knowing that we're using AI to quickly spot where somebody may have gone too far in what they're offering contractually. So Jeremy, that's really my thoughts. We're interested to see what the rest of the panel thinks.
Oh, thank you so much, Gareth. And Nate, from Main Point, I'd love to hear your perspective, especially given what you have been observing with regard to supply chain broadly, but also in the realm of finance, the role of automation and artificial intelligence and machine learning in helping organizations, using contract compliance as a key example here, become more proactive and responsive in the broad realm of governance, risk, and compliance. So, Nate, thank you, Gareth. Nate, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Thanks, Joe. A little background to start out with is that I do bring a unique perspective on this topic, working with a supply chain and operations-focused implementation consulting firm. We help executives accelerate measurable improvements across the end-to-end supply chain and operations, and we help them protect cash, reduce risk, improve EBITDA, and drive growth. So with that said, every client we work with directly with the C-suite, including the CFO, to develop programs that are designed for rapid results. So building on what Gareth just talked about, a common issue we see once we engage with clients is looking specifically at contracts, not only tied to customer agreements, but also to their supply base. Often, every department is documenting and managing contracts, if any, in their own spreadsheets and folders. Multiply that by the fact that most of them have a global footprint, meaning multiple locations, different languages, on top of maybe they went through a merger or acquisition. There's no way for us to have a consolidated and accurate view of compliance or governance procedures in a timely manner. Our clients that are unable to properly maintain contract criteria usually show traits of reactive decision-making, isolated performance tracking, and reporting of risks. This usually shows or leads to duplication of effort and misalignment of strategic priorities. This means finance teams make decisions with incomplete or potentially misleading information. So the challenge I have is what happens when we want to help finance teams with insights derived from such disparate data. Over the last decade, we've been reliant on leveraging business intelligence to help consolidate and standardize data, but to a certain extent, it still relies heavily on our team to interpret the contracts, which takes a lot of time. In recent times, we're seeing a tectonic shift from BI to AI, with machine learning leading the way. A term we commonly refer to now is intelligent automation, which describes a holistic approach for digital transformation, mainly to accelerate processes for a new era of disruption and productivity. It also contemplates the use of analytics and AI to make automated intelligent decisions. Automated insights mean breaking the human barrier of thinking. The transformation effort occurring now, not only to us, but to our clients, to automate contract analytics and to extract data from complex documents using workflows are now being powered by machine learning and what Gareth said, NLP. This technology is allowing us to redirect valuable resources towards strategic business initiatives and reducing the manual intervention for analysis. To summarize, digitalization is a key enabler to agility, and it supports a more transparent and automated approach to managing financial risk and performance. Financial leaders can create the ambition for change and be the catalyst for the organization to make this reality. So Joe, I'll hand it back to you for more commentary from our other panelists.
Thank you very much, Nate. I really loved how you weave together, both you and Gareth have weaved together the notion of process automation, which we will get to, as well as machine learning and natural language processing. So it's great to weave those together, and again, contract analytics being a prime illustration. So thank you, Nate and Gareth. Chris, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Well, I drew third, so following those guys is great. But so both amazing comments on what I'm seeing. But you know, when I think about governance, risk, and compliance, it really sits at the intersection of a requirement, in quotes, and a control. And you know, traditionally, what I've seen is that firms rely on people, processes to mitigate risks, which, you know, in that design or that traditional operational design, you got maker checkers, lines of defense, and everything, and that really layers on excess cost, as well when you're dealing with people, inconsistent approaches, and when you're dealing with large amounts of data, you're not getting to everything. You're using sample sizes. So, you know, as you continue to grow as an organization, I've seen it in financial services, I've seen it in startups. At first, that's a very good approach, but at one point it becomes untenable. So the question really everybody asks at that intersection when they reach that point is, well, how do I reduce costs as well as reducing my risk? And I think that's the fundamental question. That's where technology really comes into play. It's not a journey that a question you're going to solve immediately. I think it's a journey you need to embark on, and I think digitization is one of the key steps of that, building up your data repositories. Capturing, you know, when we talk about contracts, we talk about unstructured data or dark data, getting at that information, because that's where risk is going to lie. Unless you've already encountered it and mined it, that's a backwards looking view. You need to digitize everything so you can have a forward and agile thinking process built into your organization. So the outcome really will help you, you know, be more intelligent, reduce your costs, and obviously attack your risk and manage your risk effectively. And examples I see coming up, you know, in regulation and in different elements is IFR 17 is coming up for insurance companies. That's forcing them to bucket massive amounts of insurance contracts. You know, we've been asked to say, can you use labor arbitrage and just hire a bunch of people to read information? You can, but you're not going to get at everything. So it's classic examples like that, and more recently, with COVID-19, you'll have stuff like force majeure. Where am I exposed to these elements within my contracts? How do I identify it? And how can I be, as a finance leader, I can model the impacts of this within my organization through assumptions. But if I have access to data, I can be more intelligent in managing the risk and working with my leadership team to steer them in the right direction to mitigate worst case scenarios. So I think that's really where you need to go, is you need to start thinking about the digitization process and the journey and the data capture process that you're going to embark on.
Thank you very much, Chris. I love the illustration, the example of IFRS 17, and more broadly, the notion of being able to augment the capabilities of one's either finance team or additional resources that may accompany a finance team, but the idea that one can increase one's capabilities rather than simply replace humans with automation. It's the combination of the two. And in that context, Scott, I'd love to hear your thoughts about GRC. Again, you know, we've highlighted contract compliance, but hear your thoughts about the role of automation, process automation, that is machine learning, artificial intelligence, in helping organizations be more proactive and responsive with regard to governance, risk, and compliance.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think what I'll be bringing is sort of a vendor perspective. And Chris, you didn't like going third. Try going fourth. With some great input, guys, so appreciate that. It was really kind of interesting, actually, tying it back to even the poll results. A little bit mixed, and having seen the broad mix of industries that are participating in today's webinar, that's not entirely surprising, but it was pretty consistent with some of the analyst conversations that I have, Gartner, Forrester, those kinds of organizations where, depending on the industry, the level of maturity from a digital transformation perspective is quite different. So if you look at banking and finance, they're certainly at the top. Life sciences is kind of in the middle, number two. Industries like oil, gas, and energy are a little bit lower down. So I think if we were to split that poll by industry, it might be kind of telling as well. But the bottom line is that organizations are still trying to figure this out, right? How are they going to actually make this transition into a truly digital business and leverage technologies and capabilities such as automation, artificial intelligence, those sorts of things. And I think as a couple of the earlier presenters mentioned, it's that combination of people, process, and technology, right? It's not any one thing. And the nice thing about the presenters today is you've got kind of that mix, right? I obviously represent the technology side. Chris, Gareth, and even Nate represent some of the process, but also the people side. Gareth and Chris in particular having, a C-level perspective on some of these challenges. So I think it's going to be a really interesting back and forth conversation. And some of the challenges are, as Gareth noted, there's a real complexity to this content. So it's not just the contracts, it's all of the associated documentation around it. So there may be some focus on contracts, but when you're talking about governance, risk, and compliance, it's that full suite of challenges. And really what you're looking to do is basically get answers to the questions that you've got as they relate to GRC. And to get answers, you need data. And that's one of the big challenges and where the opportunities for things like automation and AI come. And also being able to do it at scale. As Chris quite rightly pointed out, you can throw people at this, but that's not scalable. It's not consistent. It's not going to be accurate either. So with the advances of technology that we've got these days around automation and artificial intelligence, it's a great buzzword. But yeah, things like machine learning, natural language understanding, computer vision, those sorts of capabilities, you can now actually achieve some of what was long been promised, right? The ability to actually leverage technology to augment your people. So automate certain rote processes, leverage some of these cool new capabilities to actually do some of those things that only people could do before, right? Recognize similarity in contracts, being able to identify particular pieces of information within your documentation that identify where you might have a governance risk or compliance issue. Chris mentioned IFRS 17 for insurance. Globally speaking, everybody's kind of wrestling with GDPR, right? The sort of PII regulations. Where do you have PII exposure in your documentation or your content that you need to remediate? All kinds of regulations in the financial services industry. Manufacturing has its own regulations. We deal with energy, nuclear, those sorts of things, medical. I mean, all of these industries have their own kinds of regulations, and there's a real need to deal with GRC challenges through more transparent and easy access to data. So, back to the question, automation and AI is really about helping address that fundamental lack of visibility into the 80% of the content that is basically locked in these complex unstructured document formats, contracts, agreements, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the perspective that we bring. So it's been interesting.